Hello, welcome to 30 Minutes. I'm Rick Anthony. In the wake or wreckage, depending upon your point of view of the Affordable Care Act, healthcare in this country will never be the same. Doctors are under pressure to do more with less, and a huge bureaucracy has been built up to separate the patient from the physician. Consequently, a visit to a doctor's office these days is harried, frustrating, impersonal. Obviously, that's a generalization, but in ultimate cases, it aptly describes the experience too many people are having, particularly older people. Except for doctors like my guest today, Dr. John Hobson, who 4 years ago chose to join an organization called MDVIP, Personalized Preventive Primary Care, a healthcare program that allows him to spend more time with his patients, to be more casual, to be more intimate with his patients, to get to know them better, and to design a complete comprehensive program, not just for treatment, but for prevention. Welcome to the 30 Minutes.
Thanks, Rick. Thank you.
I've been trying to get you here, as you very well know, for months, but he's a very busy guy. In the interest of full disclosure, Dr. Hobson is my physician, and my wife and I have opted to join his program, personalized medicine program, MDVIP. Dr. Hobson, from a physician's perspective, what is the state of healthcare in America today? And forget about politics.
Well, it's hard to. It's hard to, but yeah. I would say that the question could get really teased out into a few different directions. What's the state of healthcare insurance in America today? What's the state of healthcare delivery? And what's the state of healthcare education? All three, and probably there's a fourth in there that I'm overlooking, but all of those different routes require careful consideration in trying to address how do we, as they say, fix the medical machine here. Education being crucial, particularly in my field, the field of primary care, adult medicine, pediatrics, the primary care market, family practice, to create an exciting clinical adventure for these young, bright students that are coming out today that can afford them an economic opportunity to not only just practice, but to raise a family and live in a community. We're blessed in this region along Route 30 in the sense that for two reasons. One, we have great healthcare facilities. We have a great governance boards for those facilities, very considerate, very generous donors to those facilities. Going outside our borders, though, sometimes those ingredients don't exist to the same strength, and every healthcare system is very much beholden to their geography.
Yes.
And I think that's at the whole different venue in that regard.
Well, is that as true today as it might have been before? That is, Bryn Mawr is extending beyond its traditional footprint. Crozier is extending beyond its footprint. That is, they have these satellite operations in other counties.
Healthcare is still pretty hospital-centric in the sense that the hospitals have defined it. The insurers have started to take a little bit more center stage in that regard. And so you're seeing this really very significant shift from volume-based practices, which I was used previously into a value-based. And that value being based on outcomes, not process. Outcomes being how well did the patient do, did the patient return to work, did they return to family, to a good life, as opposed to the surgery was a success, and we really don't know what happened to the patient.
Well, up to now you've commented on the delivery system, the healthcare system. You did mention the insurers.
Well,
what's going on there?
Well, the insurers are, and I'd have to preface it by saying I see the insurers from my desk, not from their desk. Yes. So there's going to be a very strong perspective, but the insurers have, following the government's being a large insurer with Medicare, have followed the process that the government has with a large number of what we generously call unfunded mandates. These are requests for documenting services, which at first glance looks appropriate and very feasible and should be done. The problem is that it's expensive to do, and when margins are thin, not only does it become an expense, but it becomes an expense in time and place.
Give me an example.
I spend more time documenting what I did rather than taking care of the patient. I'll hear this from patients that are interviewing in my practice that have come from other practices that have gone on to electronic medical records, and their first complaint is they never looked at me really. They just kept typing into a computer.
Yes.
And I understand why they're typing into a computer, because the coding, the billing, and the documentation for what they call meaningful use, which is another government mandate, requires that data go in to the insurer, to the government. But that robs the patient from some time and attention to maybe asking a second or third question, or being able to read a patient's face when you ask a question and you're not getting the full drift. You don't get the context of what's going on. You certainly get a lot of content, and that's helpful, but so much of what we do, particularly in primary care, is getting into a relationship with a patient where you know them and you know when they're well just by looking at them. When they have a question, you ask a question and they return it, but you know that they're holding back. That type of relationship takes a while to develop, and it takes that time and circumstance is sometimes robbed when, in the economic model of running a practice, you have to, in the volume-based, with decreasing revenues and increasing mandates and increasing expenses, have to increase the number of patients you have to see in the term of a day in order to get the payroll and everything done.
Was it that crunch that motivated you to consider an alternative to what you've been doing for how many years?
I've been doing it for at least 32 years.
Okay,
yeah,
32
years.
Why did you decide to
you
adopt this new model?
You get into a practice, and I always go back to the day when you're sitting there in medical school and you're applying, and the guy across, it was a guy then, and I say that now because my wife now interviews medical students, but the guy gets off and says, "Why do you want to be a doctor?" And you sit there and you said, "Because I want to help people. I want to be involved in the community. I want to be participative in people's journey to their health and to their avocations." All high aspiring ideals. And so you get out into practice after your residency, and you're a little bit in debt. So you start a practice, and you find that there's an economic reality to your practice, and knowing that the world in that time and phase of healthcare, it was a turnstile. You were paid on your volume.
Yes.
You increased your volume, and it was incremental. You increase it over time. You can get up to 28, 30 patients a day for some practices. Some do 60 a day, depending.
60?
Well, you could question it, but we did question one practice, and certainly he did
Primary
60.
care position?
Primary care, but it was, you had 5 kids in at one time,
Okay, sure.
and
So
family would put that number up for vaccinations, things like that. And sometimes a nurse practitioner took care of it, so it really wasn't the doctor being involved in a primary sense. So you got into that, sort of drifted into this volume, and all of a sudden you get to a point where, as the mandates kept coming down, we looked at it and said, if we increase the number of patients we see, again, the only thing we're really robbing is the people that are scheduled. They're going to get less minutes, and it's hard to devote what you need to devote, particularly in adult medicine, because the adult medicine is sometimes a little bit more complicated. It's generally an older population. It's in Medicare, older Medicare. They come in with numerous diagnoses, some that are chronic, and they require time and circumstance and a little listening. And I think what I found is that not only was I pushing through the day, but I was not present when I was with the patient like I wanted or needed to be, actually really needed to be, because you don't pick up on the more subtle things that occur in an office visit. And so it came to a point where we looked at it in a financial sense and we looked at it in a clinical sense, and it just didn't make sense either way. So the object of MDVIP and companies like MDVIP that do personalized medical services was, how can we devise another economic model to make primary care work again, not only just for the patient and for the students that are coming down to get them interested, but also for the physicians who are starting to get burnt out, retiring early, and looking at healthcare in that cynical fashion. I know when I go to my doctor, I don't want someone who comes into the room with cynicism. I want them optimistic. I want
Yes.
them happy with what they're doing, and happy to be where they are at that time.
Not to mention having a doctor come in the room and know who you are.
Well, that helps too.
And while you're there. 'Cause
That helps.
That's happened to me, as I've shared with you. Why this? Well, you said something. MDVIP is one of several companies who have
several
adopted
companies.
the same, essentially the
some
same
folks
model.
have gone privately, did it privately on their own. Some, I think, locally. There's Total Access is another one that have a few offices in the area.
Right.
And I chose MDVIP only because the transitioning of a high volume practice to a value-based practice is complicated, and I would liken it to trying to change a tire while the car's moving about 20 miles an hour.
Yeah.
You need to keep practicing, but
Yeah.
you need to make this transition. And I had followed them for about 9 years, and they started out of Boca Raton by a few docs, and grew very quickly to where I first saw them. They had about maybe 150 doctors regionally,
Yeah.
and then it went national. And when I joined, there was 600. That was about 8 years later. I joined. There were 600 doctors involved in it, and I think presently there's just shy of 800 now. And that offers a lot of opportunity to me as a physician to have a network of other physicians in the
Sure.
country, as I
Yes.
have patients that travel, that work.
Yes.
I've had a number of instances down in Texas where I was able to call a colleague, and they saw a patient of mine down there that afternoon before their flight home.
Are the doctors all primary care or family medicine?
Internal medicine, family practice.
not
It's
specialties?
a primary care practice.
It is.
It's really developed and designed. Primary care, in its ideal setting, should have certainly the traditional access to a physician and a healthcare facility when someone's sick. But beyond that, it needs to have time and talent associated and devoted to prevention, education, which is part and parcel of that. And I think that's what got lopped off
No.
in the time element with the volume-based practice.
You're still required to sit at your computer, your laptop, or whatever, while you're with a patient to enter all that data. What advantage does MDVIP or others like it provide you from a technology standpoint, a technology platform, to take in all of the data and turn it into meaningful, useful, insightful information that you and others can use?
Well, that has happened. I think there's two answers to that. One is functionally, MDVIP is able to negotiate with large electronic medical records companies. They have a relationship with Anthem now at this point. And so my EMR is not necessarily Anthem, but a majority of the physicians use their in-house model,
Right.
and that's basically part and parcel of their payment.
Okay.
They don't pay for that system, and that's kind of nice. That's a nice thing for the individual practice. Beyond that, collecting the data and outcome, which has occurred in certain regions, certainly with United Healthcare, they're doing a study with United Healthcare, saying for folks that are in the MDVI program, particularly Medicare Advantage, and if they're in the program and those that particularly are not in the program, is there a difference in rehospitalizations, hospitalizations primarily, emergency room visits? And they've been able to demonstrate in a very short time that, yeah, there's about a 30% drop in when compared to non-MDVIP patients in the same practice. There was some ballyhoo about that, saying, well, that's you've skewed a population. And so they did a repeat study, and to my understanding, they took patients that used to be with the physician that decided not to go with the physician. And they said, it's a little cleaner study because these patients were used to be with this physician and is not now.
Yeah.
And not being in that practice, they have found that, yes, the use and the utilization of healthcare facilities, emergency rooms, goes up. Only because it's a problem. Once again, we don't have a very, very robust primary care base nationally. It's a weakened subspecialty.
What's the relationship, if any, between MDVIP and others like it with the hospital systems? You're part of Mainline.
Yes, I'm part of Mainline Health. We are independent practicing physicians, and in an effort to stay independent, MDVIP has certainly furthered that. You will also see in the systems that the systems have, out of necessity, started to their own primary care practices, because otherwise they wouldn't have a primary care practice. We do need primary care. It's an essential part of any healthcare system, particularly with the value-based models coming down the road. You'll talk about the accountable care organizations and the Affordable Care Act, which sponsored that type of promotion of accountable care organizations. The hub of that is primary care. And the challenge is to maintain and promote primary care at that hub becomes difficult in an independent setting, because basically the onesie-twosie practices are not going to stay in business. They're not going to be able, they're going to have to be part of something bigger. MDVIP gave us a chance to be part of something bigger. And then we recently, our practice, our Haverford Medical Associate practice in Bryn Mawr, joined what's called Bryn Mawr Medical Specialists in order to subsidize and promote a backroom operation that we could share with other smaller primary care physicians in order to keep them independent, because it's our belief that the independent physicians are going to be as important as the employed physicians, and we need to promote that as best we can.
So is that trend reversing? There was a trend towards affiliate payroll jobs with health systems.
No, I would say the trend is certainly going towards employment. Certainly, because it's a lot easier to document that. But I think you'll see larger primary care organizations looking at coalescing at certain rate, certain forms, and provide, in order to keep, there's an independent streak among primary care physicians. And what we find, and I found, because I used to manage Mercy Healthcare Network, which is Mercy Health System's primary care network, and the general trend is, once you're in there for 2 or 3 years, you start to look out to get on your own, because it's all primarily younger docs who really could not really hang out a shingle today with the financial costs of everything. So
you talk about value-based care as opposed to the volume. Is that the impetus that's providing a greater interest in and integration of behavioral medicine as well as the physical, the whole concept of integrated medicine?
Well, integrative medicine has taken, it evolves as we get down the road.
Am I asking the right question?
Well, it's a little off topic, but it's still important, because we're going to see in our neighborhood, we're going to see, I think Jefferson's opening up an integrative
is that
site.
right?
Yeah, it's an integrative site. And Jefferson has been in the forefront regionally on integrating.
Define integrated.
Well, yeah, that would be the important part. If you look at healthcare in the classic traditional sense, and imagine a river, that everything in the river is traditional healthcare. What's on the bank is the perhaps acupuncture, and I wouldn't put behavioral health there. Behavioral health is right.
Is in the river.
Is in the river. But on the bank there is other modalities.
Yes.
And the naturopathic medicine, the physical therapy, which is pretty mainstream, but there are forms of it, yoga, things like that, that we incorporate judiciously. And I think the integrating those, what I would say, services that are on the banks, and how far you go into the inland becomes how integrated you are. Now, that's one level of integrative medicine. The other level of integrative medicine is and a great example of that is probably the cancer centers, where you bring a patient in, and it's a team approach. You have nutritionists, you have physical therapists, you have behavioral psychology, psychiatry. You really treat the patient in a 360-degree manner, as opposed to you treat the tumor over here, you treat the heart over here, you treat the big systems that have been very heavily invested in specialty and subspecialty have started to say, we need to get back and taking patient-centered care.
Yes.
And with every heart, there's a patient. It's not
Yeah.
every patient has a heart.
Right.
And we have to start to look at integrating what we have just in the river a little bit better. We work sometimes in silos, and we have to be, and this is where the EMR is potentially promising, is to where we can get
EMR
across the
being
border, the
electronic
medical record,
right.
where we can share information
Yes.
more responsibly, more, well, certainly quickly, but more, how would I say, documenting it better, and a better documentation so that we have clear expression of patient status.
I guess the vocabulary, the lexicon is still evolving, but some people call what you do and the way you do it MDVIP, concierge medicine, rather than, and you call it personalized medicine. Is there a difference between the two?
Well, certainly we look to make a difference between the two. Concierge medicine being, I guess, the overall, the initial concept was under that umbrella of concierge. And there are concierge medical programs that for a fee, you have availability. MDVIP took a different approach to it, and one of the reasons I migrated towards MDVIP is that they looked at it as, no, we want to restore the elements of a primary care practice. And in doing that, we have to redesign it to that end, not to the financial end, and then make the finances work. So it was really more patient-centered, patient-addressed, and to a great extent physician-addressed, because the physician said, I don't want to practice this way anymore. I don't like the way I practice. I don't like where this is going. I need to redirect how I practice medicine. I want to redirect how I approach patients. So that the system was designed more for, and I use this with my interviews with patients that are looking to see what MDVIP is about. Saying basically it's an annual physical that is more like an executive physical. The only difference is we follow you around.
Yeah.
If we set up a plan, then we have a plan that we execute. We don't set up a plan and then send it to your primary care doc and say, here, you fix it out. We would get these from Cleveland and from Mayo, from certain patients that would go up there for an executive physical, and it was a lot of very good information, but it usually sat in a pile somewhere, and we dealt with the day-to-day operation of it. There was no coordination between the follow-up. And I think what I liked certainly about MDVIP and how they approached it was, no, we want to make a clinical difference. And in order to do that, we know that time is a very important element. So we're going to put a premium on time, the patient's time. And so that means when they call, they can get in. When they call on the weekend, they get the physician. When they call during office hours and it's a busy morning, we try to get them in that afternoon, but within 24 hours. It took me 2 years to train patients to feel comfortable calling me.
I still don't. I told you the first time I called, and it was early in the morning, and I was expecting to get an answering machine, an answering service, a robot someplace. Instead I got, hello, I remember it. I said, who's this? Dr. Hobson. Huh? Dr. Hobson? What are you doing here?
Yeah, I would, for the first maybe 2 or 3 months, I'd get a lot of phone calls. I'd say, hello, Dr. Hobson, click. And but my phone would keep the phone number, so I'd call them back, and they said, oh, I didn't mean to bother you. And it occurred to me, there was a lot of little things that I learned along the way that was very educational to me. Number one, they said patients need a relationship with a doctor. And for me, the revelation for me was, and I'm embarrassed to say it at this point, 30 years down the road, I needed the relationship. And I didn't realize how much I needed the relationship to get enthusiastic, to enjoy, to get up out of bed and to go to work, and to go in when necessarily in the past they said, do I really have to go? You know, it was very eye-opening for me to understand, to try to understand that a little bit better. I was surprised too how we had trained patients only to call when they're really sick. And what we're trying to do here is, no, call when you don't feel well. Get me in at the early end. I'd rather you call me early. I had a lot of, particularly women, they'd call you Monday and they said, well, you know, I didn't feel well Saturday morning, but I didn't want to bother you. and it takes about a year to say,
Yeah. I'm
feel
sure
free,
you
feel free to
appreciate-
bother me.
You appreciate that consideration.
I do. Feel free to bother me because I'd rather get in early. I'd rather get in early, and it allows me to do it. We limit the size of the practice in order to do that.
I've heard instances where some physicians are actually making house calls again. Is that part of personalized medicine?
That varies from practice to practice. I'll tell you in two things. One of the developments that have occurred, and I wouldn't say one of the stronger clinical developments, but it nonetheless is understandable, is the development of hospitalists. Now, hospitalists are family practice or internists trained to be primarily working in the hospital for patients. And up until about maybe 5 years ago, my partner and I, we would go into the hospital to see our patients, and we were responsible for them in there. Well, as you can imagine, the hospital needed to go into electronic medical records. We went into electronic medical records, not necessarily related to one another. So we had our EMR to deal with, they had their to deal with, and as you can understand, these things evolve, and so changes occur. So as it went down the road, the hospitalists were only in the hospital, they became very good at the computer.
Yes.
And we really need them. We have very, very good hospitalists. They're very bright, very helpful. And so we've unfortunately though given up our charge of the patient when they're in the hospital. Now, you're a patient. I'm a patient too. You sit there saying, but I'm a doctor, and I say I want to be your doctor and I want to take care of you when you're sick. But when you're in the hospital, I won't see you.
Yeah.
It doesn't make sense. There's something wrong with that.
Yes.
And so what MDVIP has allowed me to do is to go back into the hospital. Now, I still use the hospitalists because they're 24/7. They're very good. They're very helpful. But as much as I need their help, I think a lot of times they need my help to say, this is the patient, this is their best, this is what they do. I just came from the hospital today, and there was a patient in there that they were going to discharge. But when we talked about it, I said, let's give it an extra day, maybe transfuse, let's see how they do. Because I know them on the outside better than they do. And they acknowledge that, just as much as they know what's going on the inside.
Right.
But that communication, that handoff has been somewhat diminished. When you're doing a volume-based practice, they never come into the hospital. And that's sad. I mean, we've lost something with that, and they've lost something. The physicians have lost something clinically because I benefit. I had lunch today with the chief of medicine at Bryn Mawr and the chief of surgery. And you sit there and just have a conversation with them. You learn so much about what their life is about. You really gain a clinical edge that when you're in your office, you sort of eliminate yourself.
As we reach the end of this visit, if you had one wish, if there was one thing you could do over which you had some control to improve delivery, quality, outcomes, whatever, what would it be?
Well, I think it goes back to your first question. What is the state of healthcare? As I said, there's three routes. Of the one would be education. I think we need to really encourage primary care. We need to encourage the insurer to promote primary care. It cannot be in my era, in the 80s and 90s, it was the whipping post for the insurers. We're going to get the most we can out of them. And as a result, they've somewhat decimated the market for primary care in spirit and in numbers. So we really need to focus there. If anything I could do to promote, and I think MDVIP is one possible solution to that. I don't think it's the end result, but I think it's one that will create perhaps an avenue to a system that allows for a better life in terms of primary care for the patient and primary care for the physician. That would be my, if there was one thing to solve, it would be the primary care agenda.
Well, speaking for myself, I'm glad you're there. I'm glad you answered the phone.
Oh, good. I'm
glad to be back.
I'm glad you called.
Thank you, Doctor.
Thank you.
My guest today has been Dr. John Hobson. He is a member of, part of MDVIP. If you'd like more information about that, the website is www.mdvip.com or .com. Until next time, this is 30 Minutes. I am Rick Anthony. Take very good care of yourselves.